From the William B. Travis Building in Austin, Texas, we're keeping Texas energy on track. Here's your host, Bryce Doobie.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Texas Energy on Track, the official podcast of the Railroad Commission of Texas. I'm your host, Bryce Doobie, and as always, I am joined here by our co-host slash producer, Nick Cranack. How's it going, Nick?
Oh, pretty good. I'm glad to be here. Happy to be back doing another episode and ready to get into some, I think it's a pretty interesting topic, getting into produced water. And a lot of people don't know what it is. To be honest, we're still, or at least I'm still learning what it is.
Yeah, I mean, these are all, like, as we've kind of are rolling into the show now, we had a really great episode previously talking about well plugging, and this is really now what we're excited to really kind of dive into some of these meat and potatoes issues that the Railroad Commission deals with on a daily basis all across the state. So that's why I'm thrilled today to be joined by Paul Dubois. He's the Assistant Director of Technical Permitting for the Oil and Gas Division here at RRC. Paul, how's it going?
It's going great, thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Just a little inside baseball for folks out there. I work with you fairly regularly on a lot of different topics because you are a wealth of information on all sorts of things. That's why I'm really excited to bring you on today to talk about produced water because, frankly, I see the term used. I have a vague understanding of what it is and things, but I would love to learn more, and I'm sure our listeners would as well. So let's just start out really basic. What is produced water?
So produced water is the water that is produced along with oil and gas. So when we produce oil and gas out of wells, we typically produce a fair amount of water along with it, which makes a lot of sense because oil and gas was formed by organic sediments being deposited in sediments in either large continental lakes or oceans in ancient times. So there was lots of water, typically salt water, present with the organics when it was being deposited. So there's still going to be water present when the oil and gas is produced.
When there's drilling going down thousands and thousands of feet into some of these things and they reach these layers, there's oil and water in there together?
Yes, typically. Over time, it will separate where the oil will be on top and the water will be on bottom.
As we all know, oil rises.
But that's not always the case so much now in what we call the unconventional deposits with the horizontal wells and the fracking. Okay. In those cases, the water and oil and gas aren't always stratified like that. They're often more of a mixture, just kind of all three phases mixed together. But still, you'll find them all together.
Okay. Operators go out, they extract oil, they extract gas, and then there's the produced water as a leftover, or how does that work?
Yep, they pull out whatever fluids they can get. So what they pull to the surface, then they separate. So the oil, gas, the fluids come to the surface, will typically go through a series of separators. The oil will go into an oil tank, the gas will go into a gas separation and a processing system, processing plant, and the water will go into water tanks, and then the water has to be disposed of somehow. You need to remember, most of this water is very salty, usually much saltier than the ocean. And it's going to contain some things other than salt too, because we do use some chemicals in the oil field. We use chemicals and additives for hydraulic fracturing. We use some chemicals to help separate the phases. So really anything that flows back out of the well is something that we would group together as produced water as an oil and gas waste. So traditionally, most of the produced water is disposed by underground injection. The safest, most reliable place to put this water is back underground where it came from. Again, ideally, back into the same formation from which it was produced.
Okay.
So you take out the oil, gas, and water out of the ground. You separate the oil and gas, which you want, and you put the water back in the ground.
I just realized I introduced you with your title. Could you tell us a little bit about your background? Because, like I said, he knows all these things. How long have you been with the RC, and where does all of this information come from?
So I've been with I have a degree in geophysical engineering, and for first 20 years or so of my career, I worked mostly in environmental engineering and hazardous waste and air pollution. And then I came to the Railroad Commission about 13 years ago, and most of my time, actually I spent about half my time in the hearings division as a technical examiner, and then for about the last 6 or 7 years, I've been in the oil and gas division in my current role. So I just pick things up as I go. And I'm a licensed professional engineer in Texas.
Has produced water, is this something that's I know it's always been there with oil and gas, and maybe because I've been working at the commission for 4 years, is it something that's always been known, it's always been there and will always be there?
Yes. So right across the street at the University of Texas, you see that model of the Santa Rita rig, which was one of the first oil rigs in the Permian Basin that started on UT lands and has generated a lot of money for UT.
The old Santa Rita #1.
That's right. Well, out near where that well was, a little community called Texon, there's a feature on the ground called the Texon Scar, which is visible from space.
Oh,
And
wow.
It is a scar on the land from saltwater pollution from the 1920s, where saltwater produced out of some of those early wells flowed onto the land and has continued to contaminate the land such that nothing will grow. It was learned early on that saltwater had to be managed. So we no longer have outcomes like that, or at least we try not to. I think, unfortunately, there probably are still some outcomes, hopefully on a much smaller scale. And again, like I said, the best place for it is back underground.
You were talking about how sometimes it can get used in other ways in some of the other
Yes.
extractions.
As an oil field is depleted, there are several phases in the life of an oil field. When a field is first discovered and produced, we call that primary production.
Okay.
So the field is produced under its own energy. The wells maybe flow to the surface and then are pumped to the surface. But you can only get so much of the oil and gas out that way. So then oftentimes a field is turned to what we call enhanced oil recovery, where we use oftentimes salt water or carbon dioxide or other fluids, inject those into the ground to help move the oil and gas out. So in that sense, we're using salt water as a recycling fluid to help recover more oil. In some fields, you can get most all of the oil out of the ground that way.
I'm sitting here, I'm trying to picture all of this. This is all, because again, it's also happening thousands of feet below ground.
Yes. So the challenge over the last 20 years or so has been with, and this is probably an important thing for folks to understand, I think, is when we talk about fracking or hydraulic fracture stimulation, it's a technology that's actually been around for a long time, but it was combining hydraulic fracture stimulation with horizontal wells that allowed the industry to tap into the source rock, that is the actual shales and carbonates that were the source rock for the hydrocarbons. These are the sediments that the oil was originally formed in. Conventional oil reservoirs are not where the oil was formed, but it's where the oil migrated to. So the oil was formed in a shale, and over millions of years converted to oil, and then migrated up because it's buoyant to a place where it was trapped and became separated from the water. And then we explored for it by drilling into those traps. So we would find a pool or a reservoir of the oil. Well, hydraulic fracture stimulation with horizontal wells has helped us tap into the actual source rock where there's still a lot of oil and gas left. This has let Texas produce 5 times the oil it produced in 2008. But we also produce about that much water. We also now have induced seismicity, and we have a challenge with produced water management that we haven't had before. This is coming about because of the bounty of the oil that we've been able to tap into. The challenge here is also because the nature of these reservoirs are what we call tight. They are not permeable. You have to fracture them to get the oil out. You can't put the water back into them, not like you can a conventional reservoir. So a conventional reservoir has some degree of natural porosity and permeability. Liquids are going to flow through it. An unconventional reservoir like the source rock, the shale, does not. You have to frack it to create that permeability. But we haven't figured out yet how to put the water we just took out of that reservoir back into that same reservoir. It has to go somewhere else. So putting it somewhere else has caused us a couple of problems. If we go into very deep rock, we have learned that we cause earthquakes. If we go into very shallow rocks, we cause problems with overpressure.
And what do you mean by overpressure?
We start, well, you put too much air in a balloon. And then to get to the oil, you have to drill through that balloon, which increases the cost of drilling through, right? So there are technical challenges. It can be done, but there are challenges. So whereas before we had more options for disposal of the water with enhanced oil recovery, we don't have that option now. And these wells are producing more water. It's kind of a mass balance problem. We're producing more oil, we're producing more water. We have fewer options for disposal, and the options that we do have are not as good. So we have to find alternatives. So the alternative is, how do we recycle or reuse or find some other use for the produced water? Or is that even possible?
Because I've been seeing some articles and some things recently about that. There's, I guess, discussions about, hey, what can we do with some of these waters, especially out in West Texas and things like that. So I do know that there are folks looking at stuff.
The legislature and the state and the River Commission are putting a lot of time and effort into these questions, and industry's putting a lot of time and effort into these questions. Industry is actually doing quite a lot, especially the Permian Basin, to recycle as much produced water as they can right now in hydraulic fracturing and other downhole applications.
That makes sense. I mean, if you already have it here, you'd want to use it as best you can again.
Industry has invested a lot of money in pipeline infrastructure and above ground pits to hold and move produced water around the basin to take advantage of reusing produced water, but they still have to dispose of a lot by underground injection.
So we can't just put it somewhere. It's going to go back into the ground.
It's got to go somewhere.
Okay.
Ultimately, yes. So currently, the two main thoughts about where it could conceivably go would be either towards agriculture or towards surface water discharge, that is, put it into lakes and rivers.
Okay.
But of course, before you could even think about doing that, you'd have to treat it.
So I'm going to say you can't just dump salt water on your crops. That's not going to help them.
That's right. And there's a lot of work being done, a lot of experimental work, a lot of economics and logistics work being done by industry and academia to figure out how that can be done. What are the different methods of taking water that is 3 to 5 times as salty as the ocean and turning it into water that can be safely applied to a crop or put in a river and not harm the environment or human health. The results are encouraging. A couple of sessions ago, the legislature established the Texas Produced Water Consortium, which is run out of Texas Tech. And the River Commission is an agency member of that. So we've worked with the Texas Produced Water Consortia, and there's also a New Mexico consortia and a Colorado consortia. The goal of the consortia are to advise the various legislatures on state policy to help promote the safe and efficient recycling and reuse of produced water from the various technologies and policies that states can implement to take use of this resource. There are billions of gallons of water each year available to arid western states, and this is a resource these states need and can desperately use. So how can that be done safely?
Right. Yeah. I was going to say that with especially the drilling that's in West Texas, the Permian, I used to live out in Lubbock, so I know how dry it is out there. Yeah. If you could find a way to get the salt out of that produced water, man, that would help out the irrigation and fill up rivers and lakes, especially out there in West Texas and in New Mexico where it's dry too.
We do know at the laboratory scale it can be done. There are challenges. It'll take a lot of energy. You will still have some waste to dispose. So if you think that you could take a barrel of produced water and you could make maybe half a barrel that is good for almost any purpose, that would still leave you with half a barrel that would have to be injected because it would be very, very, very salty. So you would still have to dispose of some, probably by injection. But they're also learning that some of that salt, it's not just sodium chloride. There's lots of other minerals, possibly lithium and other valuable minerals these days that could be pulled out of there.
I was hearing about that, yeah.
Once you get a concentrated brine like that, there could be other valuable constituents in there that now turn, what was a waste into something that where there's marginal value on several products.
And even sort of looking outside of the future and the research and things, which is all really exciting. We have been recognized for doing a fairly good job on already with our management programs. I know the EPA 2 years ago sent a letter to the RRC talking about what some of the work that we've done on all of this, and because we do have well-established programs with managing the current produced water in its current form.
Yeah, I think EPA has recognized our program and our injection well, our what we call our Class 2 underground injection program. I think we've done a fairly good job of administering that. Of course, we're the biggest state. We have the biggest program by far of anyone.
So speaking of that management, I mean, is produced water solely under the control of the RRC?
Produced water is an oil and gas waste, and the Texas Water Code gives the Railroad Commission sole jurisdiction for managing oil and gas waste. So when it comes out of the ground, it's our responsibility. There are some changes afoot. Two or three legislative sessions ago, the TCEQ, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, the legislature gave TCEQ the jurisdiction for surface discharge of oil and gas waste. If oil and gas waste is treated or of such a quality that it can be safely discharged into the waters in the state, into a river, a lake, pond, then TCEQ is able to permit that activity. And during session this year, the legislature granted TCEQ in Senate Bill 1145 for jurisdiction of regulating the land application of treated produced water. So what that means is any sort of use of treated produced water for either agricultural use on crops or simply to irrigate a pasture or really any, we call it land application, watering the ground, that would be TCEQ's jurisdiction, which means they will be responsible for coming up with the standards and program parameters by which that would be deemed safe. Now, TCEQ is currently working on, they have several applications in-house for some discharge permits where some operators are requesting authority to discharge treated produced water into several water bodies in the state. I believe the Pecos River and possibly Red Bluff Reservoir in Reeves County. And those are pending with TCEQ.
And these would be, like you said, this is that treated water. So this is post...
That's right.
Not the briny water that was extracted, not the not produced water.
The operators are going to have several different treatment processes, but again, when it comes out with oil and gas, there's going to be a primary separation. Then the water phase would go through some sort of another separation to clean it up and get rid of, basically make it reusable for fracking or some other downhole use, but it's still got most of the salt. And then there are several other processes that it may go through. And different companies are exploring different technologies to desalinate, to get rid of most or all of the salt, to bring it down to very close to drinking water standards, if not drinking water standards, but standards such that it could be applied to crops like cotton or alfalfa, or applied to a pasture, or discharged into a river.
Is the salinity of the produced water the same no matter where we're drilling? If it's the Permian or the Eagle Ford, is there a difference there?
There is a difference. There's a difference not only in the Permian, there's a difference in the East or the West Permian, what we call the Midland Basin or the Delaware Basin or the Central Basin Platform. There's a difference among the formations as you move from shallow to deep. But yes, there's also differences in the Eagle Ford or East Texas. There's lots of differences all over.
I didn't know if it was because you're doing the same process or a similar process. I didn't know if there was any difference, if it's like more difficult to get the salt out or easier or, that sort of thing.
You will find some constituents are present in some areas more so than others. For example, the Smackover Formation is a formation in East Texas and into Louisiana and Arkansas that's known for its lithium. Other formations don't have. But each formation is likely to have some characteristics that other formations are not.
I think at some point we need to have a geologist on just to talk. I'd be fascinated about getting into all the geologic history of where all these things come from when you look back over the millions of years on the inner seas and all the different things that why this is here and this is here and all of that. But that's a whole other podcast, I think.
And I was going to say, we need to have Paul back on again. I mean, it's, time's flying by and it's just, man, you have a wealth of information and a wealth of knowledge that is just, I think it's amazing. And that it really helps us understand and hopefully helps the listeners understand kind of what's going on with something that could be a difficult process, but it helps us understand at a surface level.
Sure.
No pun there, but surface level, what's going on?
This is a topic that we are aware of and that we are really committed, because like you said in the beginning, we have known since we've done the first drilling that produced water is a byproduct of this. And as the oil and gas industry helps power Texas and power the world, we're going to have to find different solutions and have ways throughout all this to manage the produced water that is associated with all of this.
We have come to see the Railroad Commission staff, my staff, we see produced water as the challenge of our day. The challenges we faced, whether we're talking about well plugging and the costs involved there, or some of when we see in the news our challenges with salt water flowing at the surface or earthquakes, these are all produced water challenges. We have to have better strategies and solutions for dealing with produced water. One of the things we asked the legislature for is funding to develop a system to have the operators tell us how much water they produce. Currently, we don't have good numbers on how much water is produced in Texas every month. We have estimates we don't make, but industry makes, or we hear them in the news, 24 to 30 million barrels a day.
Okay.
And then we hear that about 3 to 5 million barrels a day come from Texas, New Mexico and Louisiana into Texas for injection disposal. We think it's a big enough problem. We need to know how much is produced in Texas and how much is coming into Texas. So we'd like to develop the system so we can get the operators to report that and require them to report it as a start to better understanding the magnitude of the challenge.
Got it. And like you said, it does bring on other associated challenges, both at the surface and then well below the surface, especially out in the West with seismicity, which is something we're going to be talking about on our next episode. But thank you for sharing that information, because it is an issue that does impact all of us, and it is something that we do work here at the Railroad Commission on a daily basis. So thank you for your time, and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Yeah, I can't wait to have you back. Yeah, we'll definitely get you back on a future episode. And speaking of future episodes, Bryce, you mentioned seismicity. That's going to be the topic of our next episode coming up, episode number 4. Remember to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast apps. That's tough to say. And share, friends, family, get it out there, because we have a lot of great, interesting topics coming up, from inspections with CID, the Critical Infrastructure Division, and we have, of course, towards the end of the year, some holiday things, Veteran Special coming up, and then we'll have some kind of best clips towards the end of the year. So a few months to go, believe it or not, before we do get to the end of the year, but we have just jam-packed information for each episode. So remember to subscribe and share the podcast, and follow along on X or Twitter, TXRRC, LinkedIn and Facebook is Railroad Commission of Texas, and then over on Instagram, Railroad Commission of Texas. So we're out there, and we'll be definitely letting you know when the next episode comes about.
Yeah, so as always, thank you so much for joining us. Once again, my name is Bryce Doobie, joined as always by Nick Granack here at the Railroad Commission of Texas. We'll talk to y'all soon.